Hi, welcome to this video on simple textual variant selection. In this video you're going to learn one of the most basic ways you can use your textual critical apparatus to help you decide what the best reading is for the variants in your passage. So first thing you want to do is pick a passage that has some textual variants in the footnotes below. It doesn't matter which one it is. We're going to go through a couple of them for examples, but you can pick any you like. Down in the footnotes, the variants that are represented, these also represent collations of many manuscripts. Let's say it has 3 readings, but 100 manuscripts are cited. Those manuscripts are collated according to their reading. Write down an alternative translation for each of the different words. Now, here's what you might do step by step to get that done. In just a moment. First of all, you're going to read that section in Bruce Metzger's commentary. He will usually have a commentary on your verse or the range of verses that your variant is found in. That can be useful to you as you try to sort things out. You're going to perform a somewhat lengthy process of determining the best reading from among the ones available in the manuscripts. So, first of all, understand how textual decisions are made. You've already read Metzger's introduction, but that gives you some information on how to decide textual things. On the first line on page 1, you're going to have several pages when you're done with this. You're going to write out the Greek and then translate the verse, clause, or phrase just as it exists up in the upper portion of your Greek New Testament. That is the text as it stands in the Eclectic Edition. That is going to be reading 1, label it such. On your next page, you're going to start reading 2. This will be the first variant down in the footnotes. And you're going to keep doing this consecutively. Start a new page, start the new number for each variant that's there. On separate pages, translate the same verse, this time with each variant. So your first page is going to have it as the text exists. Your second page is going to have it as first variant suggests. And then as second variant suggests on the third page, and so forth. The number of pages you will have will equal the number of possible readings that are cited there. There may be more cited elsewhere, but we're limiting this to what is cited in your textual apparatus. Label these consecutively as reading 2, 3, etc., however many you might need. For each reading after the first reading, actually, I want you to do this for all of your readings. So page 1, cite every manuscript that you can find that has that reading. Page 2, every manuscript that has that one. Page 3, everything that has that one. You're going to do something with those manuscript tags. All right? Manuscript symbols are given their century in your Greek New Testament introduction. You want to also copy down the century number next to each manuscript witness. Next to each manuscript symbol and date, also write down the text family it belongs to. Now, not every manuscript is identified with a text family, but if it does have a text family, you want to get that in there. And you can find this text family in Metzger's Textual Critical Commentary. Now, I have trimmed out some pages from all of these sources for the next several slides. So we're going to look at some pages. First of all, we have a page here, and this is for Luke. I will skip ahead and see what the verse is. Luke 11:2. So we're looking at Luke 11:2 first. I also have another one from Luke and one from James that we'll take a look at. In the material in Metzger, you have these text types or families and witnesses that belong to such family. It's different whether you're in a gospel or the Acts or the epistles. And so we're dealing with Luke, so we're paying attention to gospels. So all of the manuscripts cited here in this square to the left, these are Alexandrian witnesses for gospels. So Luke is included in here. And specifically, some manuscripts are split. In other words, it depends on what the exemplars were they were copying. They might have grabbed an Alexandrian exemplar first and then grabbed a Byzantine to finish out. So some verse ranges might be from a different text family. It's possible. So pay attention to that if you have verse ranges. All right, next we can see these are the places where Luke uses Alexandrian witnesses. Next slide, these are Caesarean witnesses for Gospels. Then these are Western, and finally these are Byzantine. All right, and we'll just go back through briefly. Notice that B and Aleph. Aleph is Sinaiticus, B is Vaticanus. Both of these are Alexandrian witnesses for Gospels. They happen to also be for Acts, but notice in Acts, Alexandrian also picks up. See the capital A there. But Alexandrinus is not an Alexandrian witness for Gospels. The Gospels, they're a different family. All right, so down here you see less prominent manuscripts. Some papyri manuscripts, P37, P45, are famous Caesarean ones. And some citations of the Church Fathers, also famous from this area. Next, you have Western. This is where we see D. D is common also for the book of Acts. You also have other pages for Paul's epistles and Catholic epistles, but we're not showing those here. All right, finally in the Byzantine, Alexandrinus is a Byzantine source for the Gospels, but it is an Alexandrian source for the rest of the New Testament. It's interesting how one document can be in several places. So here we have A, E, F, G, and so forth. And a lot of these are Byzantine for the Gospel. So for Luke, A would be a Byzantine source, not an Alexandrine source. If you were in Paul, it'd be different, right? So you have to pay attention to this chart to sort out what text family you have. So when you've got the text family, and then you've also went into the front matter of your Greek New Testament, and next to each one you've added century. That wasn't done here on this student project, so I'll explain what's here. They've done the text family research. And so in Luke 11:2, you have the reading pater in the text, and pater hemon ho en tois uranois down in the footnote. Two readings, one in the eclectic text, the other in the footnotes. One is very short, one is very long by comparison. And we have three things you can tick off here. We have shorter and harder, explains the other, and characteristic of the author. Now, in order of difficulty, the shorter versus the longer is the easiest thing to determine. Which one is harder is more difficult to explain, but that's what you get from the front matter in that you've read already in Metzger's commentary, how to decide what's harder. Which one explains the other? I don't mean that it explains what that phrase means. What I mean here is the fact that it exists explains how you could have gotten the other reading. And sometimes you will have two readings where the existence of one kind of sort of lends itself to number 2 showing up, but number 2, if it were first, would never lead you to number 1. So explaining the existence of the other, or there's an easy explanation to understand how a scribe would get 2 from 1. Reading number 2 from reading number 1. So you're trying to identify these things based on known scribal errors and things like that. The characteristic of the author is probably the most difficult one to do. You have to look widely in that book, whether it's Matthew or Luke, in this case Luke, and see what that writer typically does when putting these kind of words together. And so here we're wondering if the Father needs to be explained that he's in the heavens, and not typically in Luke. So when we take a look at the evidence up above, number 1 is obviously shorter. So the student who worked on this one checked number 1 for shorter, not number 2. Which one's harder, which one's easier? It's actually very difficult to explain how either arrives from the other, so they left that blank. The other, well, harder, I should say. Neither one of them are, when we deal with something that's harder versus easier, smoothed out grammar versus rough grammar that's hard to figure out what the author means. So if it is harder, something is complex there, and it was simplified in the later manuscripts. We see that kind of thing happen very often, so that's what we mean by there. But explaining the other, it's easier to explain, for example, that some scribe thought you needed to say in the heavens, or among the heavens, than to explain how a scribe would have read that and said, oh, we don't need that. Since it's easier to explain how it would get added than how it would get subtracted, number 1 is the one that explains 2. We have an easier explanation for getting from 1 to 2 than from 2 to 1. So that gives number 1 the best score here. And then characteristic of the author, that's the broad one. This student did the work, noticing that Luke hardly ever qualifies father in the same way as some other writers might. So we could even argue possibly that the scribe who added ho in tois uranois was thinking of a different New Testament passage and added those phrases in there. Now, when we try to add the text family stuff, notice we have Alexandrian, Caesarean, Western, and Byzantine divided up. Now, Alexandrian is related to Egypt, the home turf of origin and such. That's what that connects to. Caesarean supposes Palestinian origin. Is it really? Is it something we're a little further north? It's hard to say. Western is definitely Rome, North Africa, like Old Carthage, and West. So these are the Latinates group of people. They may use Greek, but their Latin is primary. And the Byzantine group is mainly manuscripts from like Upper Turkey, South Greece, and maybe even North Greece as well. But the area that was later the Byzantine Empire as opposed to the Roman Empire. Out of all this, we actually see pater by itself not really represented in the Byzantine family. But we do see the other reading represented in all 4, the number 2 reading. So on that basis, you might argue number 2 is better, because more text families have that reading than not. But pater still is widely attested in A, C, and W. Alexandrian, Caesarean, and Western, so you probably could argue both ways here on the text family. The student didn't add a note about this, but you could have also gone in and labeled century on each document. If you were to do this, you would realize that B is very early, and many of the others cited here are much later, and A is also quite early. Alexandrinus is fairly early, but it's a Byzantine witness for this gospel. All right. Now, we're going to look at another example from Luke 24:53. On this example, there's 3 readings, and some of the stuff is a little bit confusing, so we want to unpack some things here. Notice this letter here. I'll just kind of bounce my arrow under it here. That is supposed to be Aleph. They couldn't figure out how to type an Aleph on their keyboard, so that's Sinaiticus. Both Aleph and B are together here on Eloguntes. So that thing about Aleph and B being united is a strong thing here. We can go back a screen too and see where Aleph was there. Aleph and B were together as well on pater. And both of those have early dates. All right, and P75 is also early. So you actually have 3 early documents here on Eloguntes. Eloguntes is attested in 3 different text families. Ainuntes, only 1, and the combination of Ainuntes Kai Eloguntes is found in 2 text families, notably Alexandrinus being the older one. So if you're arguing from age, P75, Aleph and B are your oldest stuff. If you're arguing from widespread attestation, Eloguntes is where you go, because there's 3 families that have it, where there's only 1 with the reading Ainuntes alone. Now, you're really only deciding between those 2, because you can explain reading number 3 another way. So if you're looking at the 4-item grid at the bottom, which one's shorter? Obviously, you could say Ainuntes is a shorter word than Eloguntes. That doesn't really count. But the bottom one, Ainuntes Kai Eloguntes, is 3 words. That one is definitely longer. So either of the top 2 are shorter. So here the student said 1 or 2. Can't decide here. Which one's harder? When you read Eleguntes in the text, it is harder to explain its existence than Ainuntes. So the student here decided Eleguntes is the harder one. Maybe Ainuntes was a reading that was inserted later because it was easier to read. Possibly. You can probably argue that one both ways based on different linguistic evidence, but that's how this student argued. All right. When it comes to which one explains the other, since they believed Ainuntes was easier and Eleguntes was harder, they thought one led to two, and then both of them existing in the manuscript history led to three. 3 is more easily argued as a conflation of 1 and 2. A scribe at some point simply knew both existed and said, well, we need both of them. So that's what we see in Alexandrinus, which is an old document compared to some of the others up here. It's pretty old, and whoever was the scribe there or in the exemplar for Alexandrinus decided, hey, we need both. Let's get them both in here. We got old documents with both. But the scribe who did Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, and the scribe who did P75, did not feel they needed both. Whatever evidence they had. Maybe they didn't have both in front of them. Maybe they just had one. So when we take a look here, we can't decide which one is characteristic of Luke. The co-location of these two words might be rare, or he may use one versus the other with the same frequency. So here the student decided, I can't decide which one's characteristic of the author, but not both together. It's either one or the other and done. So at the end of the day, you can scratch off the rule at reading 3 based on this analysis, and you could possibly decide reading 1 is the best somehow, even if it doesn't get a high ranking in the textual critical apparatus. Now, for both of these, this exercise and this one, the previous one, it is helpful after you're done and you decide you've got a lot more things pointing to reading 1 and a lot less pointing to reading 2 or 3. You can kind of sort of see at a minimal level how the text critic editors decided here on your verse, why they have the one up there and the others down the footnote. You've basically reached the same decision they did. All right? So this is kind of a confirmation of how you may find some that you disagree with, and that's perfectly fine. But for the most part, if you've got a strong level of reading, some of the Greek apparatuses rank the readings A, B, C, or D. Like you'll get a grade at the bottom, how certain they are that the one upstairs in the text is older. And they'll say A if they're really certain, B if they're kind of certain, C if they have some reason to think it's the right one, but they're not sure, and then D, they've really got no idea. Something to that effect. Now, in UBS 6, and I'll say a thing here about both UBS 6 and the textual critical commentary that's coming out to go along with it. They both already come out. They both came out in October. They're both shown on display at Society of Biblical Literature. The grade of A, B, C, and D have different meanings in UBS 6 than they do in 5 and earlier. So be aware of that if you purchase a UBS 6. But they're still ranked kind of the same way, and actually I think the new UBS 6 is more honest about the certainty levels than perhaps the later editions of UBS 4 and 5 have been with A, B, C, and D. Anyway, and I say that as intellectual honesty, not as they're trying to deceive you kind of dishonesty. It's more like the clarity of what can be known is more reflected in the definition of A, B, C, and D. But they still work kind of sort of the same. A is the best one, D is the worst one. And there's more uncertainty with C and D readings and less uncertainty with A readings. So if you come across an A-level reading, you should be landing just using basic resources like the footnotes at the bottom and the front matter in both the Greek New Testament and Metzger's commentary to reach the same decision the editors did. Because they have provided you with the best evidence that caused them to reach their decision. you won't likely uncover something they missed. Now, if you're doing hardcore textual criticism, where you are collating all the manuscripts yourself, you may uncover something they did not see or plan for. That's possible. But using what they produced for you in publication, you should land pretty close to the same decision they did, with some tweaks. If you've got a B or a C reading, you might find something, a C or a D reading, you might find something else that helps steer you to a reading different than they did. Now, UBS 5, Nestle Lalande 28, for the most part, oldest is best, and Aleph and B united is hard to break. That's not always the case, but if you've got Aleph and B together, like here, that's most likely going to be a reading. Now, what can you do with this stuff after you've done it? We talked about this one. I'm going to just share with you a note I added to a project I worked on. Both of those other two were student examples that I borrowed and used over the years. Here was a passage in James. I don't have the verse here, but I believe this is in James. Karpos speiretai tois dikaiasunes. I believe that's an erene. And yeah, I'm having trouble reading the yellow there, and something erene. Okay. Dikaiasunes is the part that is in the Greek New Testament, the item that has different readings. So I have an asterisk by it, linking it to my footnote below. I'm choosing the one that's in the text, but then I have a statement why. So someone who comes along and says, oh, wait a minute, your verse that you read to us today has got a textual problem. Maybe what you said isn't accurately what the author intended here. So what you do next here is you go to your footnote and you say, this reading is preferred over the one with any definite article, and that was the issue. Some had definite articles, some didn't. And by the way, I don't think the article is actually definite, but many grammars call it that, so I chose to do that here. My preferred label is it's just an article. But this reading is preferred over one with any article due to wide attestation among the families. So I could find Alexandrian, Western, Caesarean, and Byzantine texts that did not have an article. And it's also shorter, by one article, not much. And then it's also the harder, because you expect an article when you often on this word, because it's usually referring to a specific righteousness. The fact that here it's not is a little bit rare. Now, I don't know that we can say that either is explained by the author's preference of using terms. It's not widely used. I think it's used split, actually, sometimes with articles, sometimes without. So you can't decide which one is more characteristics of the author. But based on wide attestation, that was how I thought it tipped the scales in favor of the one without article. And so I went with the one in the text. But this is something you can do with your apparatus and the front matter on the Greek New Testament and the front matter on Metzger's commentary. Now, going back to that Luke 2 example, I'm going to show you how to use these parts. I've got to find my cursor. There we go. Found my cursor. So, this is a Thessalonians passage. When reading through here, verse 12 has an issue. And footnote 2, I highlighted it here with the red 2, points us to footnote 2 down below. And we're dealing with kaluntos, the word kaluntos. When we scroll down here to footnote 2, we see that this is a B reading. B reading's not the best, but it's still good. What are the other readings at a glance? Only one, Kalesantos, which is the aorist of the same part of speech. So what we're dealing with is present tense versus aorist tense. That's the only issue here. Now, what evidence do we have? We have be, or Vaticanus, with the present tense, and we have Aleph over at the end here with the aorist tense. Aleph and be are split. What would you know? And this is why we don't have an A reading. We have a B reading. And the B reading here does have some support that Alexandrinus and Sinaiticus are matched. For Thessalonians, both of these are Alexandrine manuscripts, and B, Vaticanus, is also an Alexandrine. So the family of Alexandrine witnesses are split. So it's a split decision here. When you look at the amount of evidence that's in each, there's more biblical manuscripts and way more minuscules and lectionaries that support the present tense reading, with one manuscript adding a para onto the front of it, 0150, still giving us the present tense. Obviously, the para is unique to that manuscript, and therefore it's not a high reading. It's not even considered here as something that you might consider. It's just extra. And going back up to the text, we might actually have another para in the text. Just double checking that. No. A lot of times when para is with the genitive, you have like a call from the side of someone, and it does make sense, it does fit the context, so that's probably why somebody added para to the thing, but it doesn't seem to be original. It's only the one in parentheses that had the para, but all the other evidences are given in a sort of order that the text commentaries always put them. Uncials first, and the numbers with 0 next, and then the numbers that start with something other than 0 next, and then other letters. So you have lectionaries last. And you also have church father citations, and you've got old Italian editions, old Vulgates, old Syriacs, old Slavonics that also have the present tense. Chrysostom and Brosiaster also have the present tense. Chrysostom is split, though. In some places he cites a present, and in one other place he cites the aorist. So he is split. You can see Chrysostus probably commentary on this book, has it with present, and lem. I would have to look at the abbreviations to know what lem means, but lem on Chrysostom there has the aorist. But with the aorist, you only have 2 uncials versus 6 or so. None of the manuscripts that start with a 0. And then the ones that start with a number other than 0, 104, 459, basically 4 of them where you've got close to a dozen up above. Your evidence is about 1 to 3 ratio in favor of the present tense. So just on numbers, you might push for that present tense over the aorist. This just kind of gives you an example how to start thinking through the text critical data. And I think this one, I'm not sure, but I think this might be the Nestle 28 rather than the UBS 5. So if this looks different than your apparatus, that's probably why. All right, scrolling down some more, we come to another edition, verse 12. And notice the little bracket mark up by the red arrow. This is the Nestle line, I think, or this is the UBS. And I've got them switched in my mind. But that little angled bracket is the thing that clues you into the thing below. So depending on which one you're using, you need to know how they each work. The issue is Kalesantos. This big line right here, this straight up and down line, splits 2 different issues. So in this edition, more than one textual variant is considered for verse 12. but after this line starts the second one. So Cala Santos as the heiress is what's here. This one does not cite as much information, but it cites more problems. The other one cites fewer problems, but more information for each problem to help you make a decision. So it depends. Do you want to know how many places there are a problem? You use this one. If you want, it still doesn't have all of them, but it has more than the other. Or do you want to know how much evidence there is for a decision? Then it's the other one is better. And I didn't mark them to remind myself which one's which. Since this is the yellower paper, I think this is the UBS5, and I think the whiter paper was my NA28. But they both do this, they both do it differently. Sometimes just look at both of them. You might get a different sense for the witnesses. Now, looking in Metzger's commentary, there was a note for 212, Carlutos. And he says this: apparently under the influence of GA 1.6, the Textus Receptus adopted the aorist tense, along with Sinaiticus and Alexandrinus and these others, and a variety of the versions, the weight of whose testimony, however, is diminished by idiomatic considerations. The present tense Carlutos, which is appropriate in the context, is strongly supported by this and most meniscals, by this whole list of meniscals. So, according to Metzger, it's got more evidence, but it's on quantity. It's not based on shorter, harder. It's not based on which one explains the other. It's not based on text family spread. This one is on just simply quantity. It's a B reading. Aleph and B are split, so not surprised that it's not an A reading. Now, I will say this. The conjunction of Aleph and B on a reading probably used to have more weight than it does now. There are several arguments that have emerged since Metzger did some of this work. So, I would say that in coherence-based genealogical method, some of the things that used to be really strong arguments are a little bit weaker. So, be aware of that. Now, when we get into the text family part, these are the pages, I believe, in the front of the New Testament itself, and you get the witnesses. And so this matches the chart that we saw in the other thing, where we had the witnesses in boxes. But you can build your own boxes or design this how you like. But here, these different documents are primarily Alexandrine or Alexandrian, except in certain places they give you chapter and verse ranges, because outside those verses they're a different family. All right, here are the Western witnesses. Here, the Byzantine witnesses for Gospels. It's A. So that's in a nutshell what we saw before. In this version of the New Testament, they got rid of Caesarean. They just have Alexandrian, Western, Byzantine, and done. Caesarean's always been a debatable category, and older editions used to keep it there. More recent ones have gotten rid of it. Because it's usually mixed. And if it's mixed between several, then it's harder to say what you have when you look at it. It's also harder to use it to rule something out. So later editions have ignored the Caesarean stuff. Anyway, reading a little further, we come to the dates. P1, Papyri 1, is from 3rd century. This gives you the century over here in the date. Sometimes age of a reading can be determined just using this quick reference chart. These give you the P documents, which are all fairly old. I mean, right here, 3rd century, P1. That's pretty old. Let's see what they have for P52. I'm just curious. P52. Manchester, about 125. That is 2nd century, year 125. Now, I was there. I got to look at it, and there's been some controversy about whether it's 125 or 170. They switched the date on it. They made it. It could be as late as 170. It doesn't change anything in this. It's still one of the oldest that there are. So it doesn't really change a lot. Because the next one is about 200, P46. I think that's one of the Chester Beatties, if I'm not mistaken. And this one here is the John Rylands 125. I'm comfortable with 125. It doesn't change anything I do if it really is 170. So I always find that debate humorous. Big debate, and they moved it 40 years or so, 45 years. Okay. This one's about 200. These are some of the oldest papyri documents there are. Some of them are later, 7th century. Okay, but we've got some early ones here. Early 3rd. 3rd, you can see a lot of 3s in here. 2nd century, Oxford, P90. That one's probably as old or nearly as old as the John Rylands at 125. Some of them have dates, some of them have centuries. Then you have uncials. And I put red arrows next to this because these are the two that, if they're united, really swayed text critics from about the 50s to the 2000s or 2010s. And notice that both of those are 4th century uncials. They are the earliest of the uncials. Sometimes them and A aren't the same. And A is Alexandrinus. It's also an early one, but it's sometimes different, and it's 5th century. So sometimes you're comparing 4th versus 5th when you're looking at your arguments. Almost never use anything as late as the 8th or 9th century. I suppose you can have them in there to add quantity to an argument. But those two 4th century ones are huge. And I would say any of the 5th century ones usually weigh in most arguments. All right? I'm not sure if this Washington one is also called Washingtonionis or something like that. There might be another name for that. This is also saying Washington. Some of these are in Michigan, but I don't remember which ones. All right. Then you have the ones with zeros on the front. They have two different designators. They were called different things in history, and then others were only called the 0 numbers. These are often pretty old, too. And then finally you get down to here. These are all the ones with zeros. These start with letters. These start with P. And so these all have different values based on date. This front matter helps you with century selection so that you can decide which pieces of your evidence are actually older, which ones are not as old. And that older is usually better. It's usually preferred. All right, enough said. This kind of gives you enough to do something on one passage. Go ahead and pick a passage and try to work through the footnotes in one of the two Greek editions. Grab Metzger's commentary on your passage. Keep the front matter for Metzger's handy, as well as the front matter for the Greek New Testament. If your electronic edition of the Greek New Testament does not have the front matter available or easy to find, just let me know. I can get you photocopies of it that are scanned in from mine. But I have a lot of that front matter on this document, and it's going to be sitting in the portal as well. All right. Thank you so much. We'll discuss this and maybe work on a passage together when we meet next week.